Hey up and welcome to another episode of Last Cast. Today you join us for just a simple session really at a local mill pond. It's somewhere that we actually fished similar kind of time last year, probably more like April. We fished this peg for a few bream and silverfish and we're pretty much coming back today to do a similar kind of thing really. We've been out in pretty poor conditions to say the least in the past few weeks. Funnily enough, we came up here the other week and this lake was actually flooded. The water level was well over these platforms, so we ended up having to fish the top pond in terrible conditions. So we've come today just to really try and catch a few fish and have a sort of simpler session. As I say, we've fished in really poor conditions all over Yorkshire really the past few weeks, trying to get the odd film done, and it's been difficult. So we've just come here today to catch a few fish. The approach that I'm going to use today is going to be sort of revolving around both the roach and the bream. So I've got a couple of ground bait mixes and two lines that I'm going to fish. The general plan of attack is I'm going to look for the bream in the deeper water, which is probably about, well, it's a top 5 couple of sections out, so probably about 9 metres or so, something like that. As you can see, the wind's blowing up this end of the lake and the clarity of the water's half decent, bit of colour, so hopefully there'll be 1 or 2 fish there to be caught. In terms of what I'm going to do for the bream line, I've got a couple of rigs set up. One sort of more traditional heavy bream rig. As you can see, we've got plenty of depth there, probably in the order of about 14 or 15 feet. One that's 2 grams and one that's 1.5 grams. Sort of, I've got effectively covering a traditional bream rig that I'd use this time of year and into summer, and I've also got one set up that I'd use in winter. Again, this time of year, changeable conditions, not really sure how the fish will respond. So we'll have a look at this rig first. Top end of the rig, we've got double 4 elastic, as you can see. A couple of nice heavy back shot as well, and plenty of line between the float and the pole tip. As you can see, the wind's already picking up and it's blowing across us, so those back shot are going to help keep that float nice and still and keep it where we've fed. The float itself is a 2 gram Sensus Jean-Francois. As you can see, nice bulbous tip on it, classic sort of pole float style, nice heavy wire stem, and as I say, a nice hollow tip there, so we can dot that down, but it's going to ride through the waves quite nicely if conditions do get a bit adverse. Just got a little number 10 back shot behind that. Again, I always add those to my rigs. The main line itself, so 11 in this case, Guru N gauge, and then we've just got an Olivet there, a few number 9 shot beneath it, a couple of trimming shot there, and I just have the Olivet running. I just think it stops it bouncing the hook out that bit more. Again, just one of those little changes that I make to my rigs. In terms of the droppers on this rig, I've just got 3 number 10s spaced out about sort of 5-6 inches apart. If I need to, I can, by incorporating all these shot into the rig, I can pull some of these down and create effectively a double bulk rig if conditions do pick up and the tow becomes really bad. Good little option to start with. So again, starting nice and light really with it. The hook length is 6 inches of 093 Drennan Drennan Suplex, not the fluorocarbon, so it's a little bit stronger than the fluorocarbon. Again, we're looking for slightly bigger fish on this. And the hook choice is a Kamasan B560 in a size 18. Ideal for using sort of caster baits, worm, maggots, and equally we've got a few pellets done as well, so giving us plenty of options there. So that's the first rig, and I've got that one set about 2 inches over depth. The other rig for this bream line is, as I say, sort of like the winter version. Starting from the top end, I've got a single 4 elastic in this case. Again, you can see a really nice long line and the back shot again. The float choice, as I said, is 1.5 grams and it's a Sensus Toscana with a fibre bristle. Again, bit more finesse, bit finer, it's going to show up those bites and accentuate them a little bit more, but equally, see now it's now calmed down. That's when I'll use this rig, when the water's a bit calmer. If it becomes choppy, then that's when I'll have to move to the hollow tipped other rig. The main line again in this case is 011 Guru N gauge. Exactly the same kind of setup with the bulk and the Olivet, but in this case I've just got 1, 2, 3, 4 number 10s spaced out even further apart, and I'm going to be laying this rig in a little bit more. The way the peg sort of plums up is we're at the inlet end basically, so what it does is it slopes away from me and also slopes down that way, so I'm going to have to cut my bait slightly to my right hand side and slightly short as well, just to compensate for that slope. But using a rig like this, what I'm looking to do is lay the rig into that slope a little bit. Going down to the bottom end, we've got 5-inch hook length this time of 095 Drennan Suplex fluorocarbon, and that's to a size 20 Colnick Nuclear N957. Slightly lighter hook, still nice gauge, but smaller, bit more finesse, as I say, slightly lighter hook length, and just generally a bit more finesse to this rig. That line I'm going to feed initially with 5 balls of ground bait. I'll quickly run through the mix that I've used because I've mixed up a couple of different ground baits today, and what I've done is quite interesting. I've effectively made my roach mix and then made a separate bream mix, but to compensate I've basically, because the water's a bit clear, it's a little bit cooler than usual, I've put half and half with my roach mix in with the bream mix, if that makes sense. So this mix actually works out about 25% swim stim krill, nice bit of fish meal, nice and full of scent, nice colour to it as well, so usually draws bream. Something I'll use when the water warms up. A quarter Senses River, again you'll see me use that for nearly all my bream mixes on these deep venues. And then in terms of what I've put in from the roach mix, that's 25%, another 25% of frenzied hemp seed black and 25% gross gardon, so a quarter of each. Nice rich mix, but equally not quite as rich as I'd have in summer. So as you can see there's a nice colour to it. It's not too dark, but equally there's a bit of a red tinge to it, which again, when the water's a bit coloured like it is today, just helps it stand out. So that's the bream line looked at. Basically I'm going to put some chopworm casters, a few micro pellets in with that and a few dead maggots, and cup in 5 balls at the start. My roach line is just at 5 metres at the bottom of where the bank is basically walled in here, where that sort of meets the silt. So it's a perfect area, it's effectively like your near side ledge. The mix that I'm going to feed there is actually, as I say, is half what I've put in that basically. This is what I mixed up initially, and it's a slightly drier mix as well. I want this to be more active, basically trying to catch the roach. So that's just half gross gardon and half frenzied hemp seed black. So nice dry, rich and sort of rich mix of particles, really active mix, so hopefully get those roach feeding early. I'm going to feed that roach line with 2 balls of that ground bait, and I'm just going to feed that with caster and loose feed caster over the top, which draws me onto the rigs that I'm going to use there. Basically that means I'm going to use a deck rig, or a standard deck rig, basically the same kind of rig but slightly toned down from the lighter rig that I'm going to use on my bream line. This is for fishing over the ground bait, getting the bait down and fishing quite positively there. So at the top end we've got a number 4 elastic, as I say, because we're fishing for roach. Again, exactly the same kind of thing with back shots and a long line, and a 1 gram Senses Toscana in this case. Again, because it's closer in, I can see that finer float bristle a bit easier than if I'm fishing further out, so I can get away with it. I've got a bulk there, and then 4 droppers, again number 10s, down to exactly the same hook length and hook as was on that, with a 5, as I said, 5-inch fluorocarbon hook length and a 20 Colmic Nuclear N957. But because I'm going to be loose feeding over that line and use an active mix, I've also set up a really nice light roach rig. It's going to fish to the bottom, but I've got this plumbed up probably 2 inches off the deck, and this is going to be laid in repeatedly with the casters. We'll start from the top end of the rig. You can just ship up there. So it's a bit fiddly with the wind. This floats a Senses Veneto, as you can see, a really nice slim pattern and a long fibre bristle. Same kind of thing with a number 4 elastic at the top end, but this is more in line with sort of laying the rig in, watching it fall. That's why we've got a long bristle there. Nice thin float. The main line for this is actually 093 Drennan Suplex, just standard. Again, slightly lighter, going to follow the casters through the water a bit nicer. I've got a bulk of number 8 stocks at about half depth, and then beneath that I've just got strung out number 11s all the way down to the hook length, which is just that little bit lighter. We've got a size 20 Kamasan B511 there. Nice fine wire hook, and that's 2075 Drennan Suplex fluorocarbon. Again, everything toned down. This is more for fishing through the water. If I start missing bites on this, then I'm also going to set up a nice little light sort of Drennan Pinky rig 4x12s, just in case I think the fish are coming off the bottom quite far to get the casters. I'll probably set that about 6 feet deep, but this is what we're going to start with. So I'll just get this popped down to one side and then show you what I'm going to do with the feeding. As I say, I've already pretty much explained what I'm going to do bait wise, but I'm just going to make up the balls of ground bait now. So for my roach line, I'm going to use plenty of caster. There's a lot of small fish in here, so I want to get casters down there and try and get some decent quality silvers into the peg. So I'm going to load this first sort of couple of balls of ground bait, really nice and full with casters like that. Again, as always, making the balls of ground bait decent size so they fit just snugly in the pour cup. I keep repeating this when we're on deep venues, just to make sure they don't spin off in all directions when you cup them in. So I'm going to feed a couple of balls of ground bait like that, as you can see, laced with casters on that short line. So I'll get the second made up, and then, as I say, I'll just have to quickly explain what I'm going to do with cupping in on the long line because I've still yet to chop the worms and things that I'm going to put in that mix. It's nice and simple. That's the feed sorted for that short line. Again, the gross guard on is for the ground bait is actually really quite sticky mix, so you don't have to mix it too dry, and obviously when you're fishing in deeper waters like this, it's a really useful addition to your roach mix. If it was really shallow, I'd probably just use Frenzied Hemp Seed Black and something like Silver X Roach, but the gross guard on's quite a rich mix, nice and bready, so it'll get the bait down in the deeper water, but because of the Frenzied Hemp Seed, it's nice and active. In terms of the bream line, as I say, I'll just explain it before I cup it in, but I'm going to chop probably about 150 ml of chopped worm. I put a bit of liquid worm attractant in that, I think, as well, about the similar kind of quantity of dead maggots, and then just a few casters as well. Again, just trying to get a bit of everything down there, and I'm also going to put in a sprinkling of micro pellets, not too many because I don't want to overfeed the fish, so I'll get those balls made up for the bream line. We'll get them cupped in, start loose feeding casts on that short line, and then we'll see what we can catch. Right, so we're now going to kick off the session. We've only got probably 5 hours today, so it's crucial that we get the feeding right. So what I'm going to do is feed the short line first. Again, these balls of ground bait are going to break up quicker, and obviously that's where I'm looking to start my session, is on that short line, so I want to get these in first. Again, useful little things to think about. Obviously in a match, those little things can save you quite a lot of time. So I've got the same far bank marker for both swims. Again, making life a little bit easy for myself. Usual kind of thing, you can see the ball's holding in the cup, little tap and that'll drop straight in without spinning off. It's exactly the same thing. So with these balls of ground bait, because of the Frenzied Hemp Seed, they are going to break up a little bit while they're sat on your side tray. So it's worth just giving them a second squeeze before you do get them into the peg. Get to the end of the section, nice little tap, and the bait goes straight in. It's simply a case, what I've actually decided to do, because I've loaded that quite rich, it's one of those things that I kind of make a decision just before I start. I'm going to probably put in 4 balls rather than 5 on that bream line, just to sort of test the water. In sort of warmer conditions, I'd probably feed a bit more, because I don't really like feeding over the top of bream when they've got their heads down. But I think 4 balls of ground bait, especially with the fish meal content of the mix, might be a little bit better than giving them 5. So I'm going to have to stand up to cup these in. It's a little bit fiddly, because we've got really awkward banks behind us. You can see one thing that I have done, just get this ball of ground bait in, is I've put an extra sort of dolly butt section on behind me. In windy conditions, what you want to do is introduce that into your pole if you can, or have an extra section. Obviously when the wind's blowing across you, if it's forcing on one end of your pole like this, if you've got something behind you, it's also pushing the same way, so it's effectively cancelling itself out a little bit more. Again, just makes life that bit easier when you are fishing a pole like this. So what I'll do now is crack on and get these next 3 balls of ground bait cupped in. Again, it's going to be a bit time consuming purely because of how awkward the banking is, but we'll get these cupped in, and then obviously, as I say, going to loose feed casters at 5 metres over that short line. Not too frequently, because I want to keep the fish fairly well down in the water, but creating a little bit of noise to draw a few fish in. So we'll get these next 3 cupped in, as you can see, loaded nicely with casters, dead maggots, the odd micro pellet and sections of worm as well. So hopefully it won't be long before the bream find these and settle over it. And by having plenty of different particles in there, it keeps them guessing and allows you to chop and change hook baits as well. So we'll probably start on the maggot, but we've equally got some expanders, dead maggots and worm and caster as well, so we've got plenty of options. So I'll get these next 3 in, then we'll start fishing. Right, so we've just had a bite there after about sort of 15-20 minutes of the ground bait being in. We had a little indication early and missed it, but that was a little fish on there. It just came up in the water as soon as I hooked it, and it's just dropped off, but that's a good little sign, and what we're really looking for, to be honest, because if I was catching fish immediately as the rig went in, what that'd tell me, there's a lot of fish sat up in the water, not really going down to the ground bait, but that was after the rig had fully settled. Nice little indication, probably in the last sort of 6 inches of the bait falling, something like that. So it shows that they're down there and somewhere near the ground bait. So hopefully it won't be long, and if we're lucky it'll be on this chuck that we get the first fish of the session in the bag. Felt like a nice little roach or little skim or something like that, and those what we're after today. We've seen a lot of the sort of 1 and 2 ounce fish top, even smaller than that, quite a few of them. And those are what we're trying to really avoid, if we're honest. We're looking for slightly better roach, the odd skimmer as well if we can get them. So as you can see, the rain started to come down quite heavily now, so I've had to put my jacket on. It's already turning into one of those days that I was describing in the intro, of the weather being poor to say the least, and as I say, affecting the filming and the fishing a little bit. There was a bite again. See, having to strike quite hard to set the hook in deep water, and also pick up that long length of line above the float. Ideally, I tend to only use sort of 6 or 10 inches above the float in terms of what you call the lash between the float and the pole tip. But on days like this where the wind's picked up a bit and it's changeable conditions, it's better to leave that section of line longer and cut it down if conditions become more ideal. And all I've got on all the rigs is 2 number 8 Stotts as back shot. So that's why I'm keeping the pole tip quite high, and what that does is tries to keep the line behind the pole tip, or in front of the pole tip and between that and the float, a bit tighter. Stops the wind picking it up as easily, and especially when using supple and light main lines, it's really important that you do consider back shotting when conditions are like they are today. As I say, that's two drops in and 2 bites over this short line. So hopefully a couple of fish will start to settle. Then, like I say, if we start getting quite a few bites on this, then I'll move on to that heavier rig over this line and see if we can start stringing a few fish together and, say, trying to identify whether they're actually feeding over the ground bait. It's a good little start, so hopefully, as I say, it won't be long before we're into the first fish. So what you're looking for this time of year is just try to build the peg steadily. It's not going to be like in summer where you're going to go in and catch a fish every drop straight off the bat. What you need to do is just steadily draw the fish into your peg, get them feeding. Again, that's why I'm putting a bit of loose feeding over this line, only 3 or 4 casters at a time, but just trying to drum up a bit of activity in the swim. Again, just create a bit of noise and try and get those fish coming in and investigating the ground bait. One thing to consider as well is, with the conditions being as they are, and as I say, the water temperatures being down, that you won't really start to get that many bites early. Because it's when you start getting bites, when effectively the fish are starting to work their way through the ground bait, there's less particles in there for them to eat, so they start picking out your hook bait more. This initial stage in the session, it's just trying to catch the odd fish that's coming in and investigating the ground bait. Again, I'm not too worried about doing this over a roach line, because it tends to be the case that you can keep feeding, putting a little bit more bait in, starting to build the peg. Whereas the last thing I want to do when I'm bream fishing is use that sort of principle. What I like to do with bream fishing is leave the bait there, let them settle over it, let them get really nice and confident, and then start trying to catch them. So that's what I'm going to apply today, is just fish this roach line for probably about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours before I actually look over that long line for the bream. Right, there we go, that's the first fish of the session. Not a big fish. We've just had a little lift bite there. As soon as I've switched onto this proper deck rig, bombed the bait down, and it seems that these fish have just moved in onto that ground bait. Interestingly though, had a bit of a lift on the float to indicate that bite there and that fish, which could tell me that they are sort of moving up and down in the water column because of the active mix. But we're off the mark at least. It's taken probably about 35-40 minutes, something like that. But that's a good little start. A couple of ounces in the net after that first lost fish that we had. Again, that's just on a single maggot, but it looks like this could be the rig to use on this short line. Again, a more positive rig generally. Getting the bait down, more positive droppers. It could well be that with the conditions being as they are with the wind, it could be that the toe on the water is sort of making that other rig behave a bit more unnaturally, and using heavier droppers like this could be the way to go. But it sort of goes to show what I was saying about covering both options, having plenty of rigs, plenty of kit set up. So I say that's been the first drop in on this rig, and it's gone straight away. So like I say, important little things to consider this time of year, especially on natural venues like this. covering your options with like a light and a heavy rig on both lines. So again, just watching those number 10s register on the float bristle. Nice positive droppers are good for that. Obviously when using a fine bristle, if you use positive droppers you get really positive bites on it. Like I say, that fish obviously lifted one of the number 10s and I was able to see it pretty much straight away. So it could be a case, like I was saying, that there's a few fish hovering over the ground bait, just watching little bits of bait falling and particles drifting up and about, and just picking off the odd little bit that they can see. So I think being that I've caught on this heavy rig immediately, or the heavier rig of the two on this line, probably going to scrap the loose feeding casters for the time being, unless I see the weather warm up or something like that to give me a clue. So there's plenty of bait on the bottom for them, so hopefully it won't take long before a few more fish are settling, and you never know on this line, skimmers might turn up as well. Right, so I'm going to have a quick go on the shallow rig now. As I said, I set it up early and we've given it about an hour or so on the short line over the ground bait, but the fish really haven't turned up in numbers. So what I'm doing is leaving that longer line for a little bit longer, just letting that settle, because if they've not turned up on the short line, I don't think they'll turn up in numbers this soon on the long line either, being that I fed a bit more bait. So I'm just going to have a couple of chucks with this little Drennan Pinky rig. As I say, it's set probably 5 or 6 foot deep, just where I've been loose feeding the odd caster, and just see if we get the odd little bite. Again, it's been quite a few small roach toppings, so that's probably what we'll catch on this. What I'm not looking to do is sort of really build a shallow line as such. I'm looking to just pick off a couple of fish quickly while I'm resting the deck line. Because what can often happen here is, if you don't start catching roach on your short line, quite often that's when the bream will start turning up a bit later in the session, because obviously I've not caught a lot of roach over that, so I've got confidence there's plenty of bait down there, plenty of casters if the bream or better roach do turn up. So what I can do is just have a quick go on a shallow rig like this and just see what I can catch. Again, because I'm not looking to loose feed a quantity of bait and draw loads of fish in, I'm using the noise of the shot being slapped on the water to do that, much like when you sort of pellet fishing shallow for carp in summer. You can do a similar kind of thing for roach fishing like this. Each of those shots hitting the water sort of sounds a little bite there, sorry, sounds a bit like a caster going in, or a bit of bait. Because I'm fishing quite deep as well on this shallow rig, I'm not too worried about the movement of the pole, spooking fish and things like that. I had a little bite there, probably small roach. There's another one now. And actually not a bad sized one, that. So what I'll do is crack on with this, try and put a few of these in the bag, and probably give it half an hour or so, and then have another look over that short line. As I say, just resting lines, letting fish settle is what fishing at this time of year is all about, especially on natural venues. Again, just putting the odd little roach in the net keeps us ticking over and keeps us getting bites. And equally, quite a few of those casters will probably make their way down near the bottom, start drawing fish in there as well. Again, in summer when the weather warms up, I'd probably loose feed casters or a few more maggots on this line and really try and develop it as the session goes on, try and get some hide into the peg and things like that. Whereas, like I say, what I'm doing today is just trying to use it to get a few bites, keep ticking over and resting that other line. Like I say, it's a useful little tip is that, using the shots on your rig, just slapping the rig on the surface a couple of times, and then all I'm really loose feeding is 4 or 5 casters. Not much bait at all. Again, it's a bit awkward throwing it with all the waterproofs on and the bait probably in the way, but again, it's just one of those things, keep ticking over, putting a few fish in the net. And that's another one on. Might be a slightly bigger fish this actually. Probably still a roach, yeah. Just decided to fight quite hard, that one. Again, interesting, these roach are hooked slightly awkwardly. They're not taking the bait right in, so I think what they're doing is sort of swimming into the bait more than anything and turning quite quickly, which is why we've missed a few bites on that deck line beneath it. Again, sort of just tells me that the fish are just generally being quite finicky. You can see all I've got in the top end of this rig is a number 2 elastic. It might be a little bit light really, but again, just want to make sure I'm getting every fish out. Like I say, keep ticking over. Again, all I'm doing is just slapping the rig on the water a couple of times, following it up with the casters, and then effectively just waiting for a bite. Another little indication there. So all the while, hopefully the fish are starting to settle over that ground bait. There's plenty of small fish shallow, so hopefully they're settling over that ground bait and gaining a bit of confidence. When we do go down there, we should hopefully catch a couple. Oh, there's a better fish. Just hooked another one on the, well, this looks like a bream actually, funnily enough, on the shallow rig. Tiny little indication. Amazing really that there's a bream there, to be honest. I think it's more of a fluke than skill, to be honest. Might just be that he's come to the casters. That's a real surprise to catch shallow. What a cracking fish to catch on a little size 22 hook and a number 2 elastic. These are what we're really looking for on the deck rig. Just see, whip that section off and unhook him and see if we can show him to camera. So he's decided to roll himself in the line just a little bit. As you can see there, belting fish to catch shallow, that a real surprise. That's a good couple of pounds in the net. Like I say, hopefully we'll catch a few of these on the deck a bit later on. That's a cracking one. So just take the slime off the line, really important, especially when you're using really fine lines like this. That's a real surprise for the third fish on the shallow rig. As you can see there, obviously I was fishing just a couple of foot deep, I'd probably just be catching small roach, but fishing sort of effectively a third of what is full depth on that area of the peg. Might just be that there's a slightly warmer section of water where the bream are sitting at the moment before they start to move down onto the ground bait in the deck and feed later. So again, what I can learn from that is that I've probably made the right decision. If I'm catching bream like that shallow, that it's probably worth me leaving that long line on the deck a little bit longer, a bit nearer to evening, and it might well be that that's when the bream start to move down and have a proper feed. But we'll get back out there and see if we can catch another couple of fish shallow. Right, so just going to ship out now with that light rig, like I said, just see if anything's settled over that ground bait now. Like I said, we're giving it another half hour. So it's had nearly 2 hours to settle as that short line. Again, usually by this point I'd have expected to be on the long line, but as is the way with these natural venues this time of year, you can't really predict what's going to happen. Again, a bit of a nightmare swinging the rig out. Ideal, I'd like to swing it well past my pole tip, pretty much straight out in front and let it settle against the shelf, but what I'm having to do is effectively just swing it out to the side to stop it tangling, and then hold the rig up, let it move itself past that sort of ledge that I'm fishing on, and then just sort of drawing it back and laying it back in again. Like I say, not ideal, but one of those things when conditions aren't great. I'll say it's just a case of waiting for a bite now. What I will do is I'll probably give it 10 or 15 minutes on this line, then 10 or 15 minutes on the long line, and just see where fish are starting to settle, where I can pick up the odd one, get the odd bite. I say hopefully it won't be long before the bream start to move down in the water and start to settle on the bottom. As I say, with the temperatures being up, it could well be that a lot of fish have come up in the water, but as I said when I was fishing shallow, it's not the most effective way to catch them this time of year. Bit of an indication there straight away. That's a fish on. As you can see that straight away after letting that line settle. And this looks like a nice roach. These are what we're after on that short line. Just taking a little bit longer for it to settle, but these are what we're after catching. See, much better stamp than the fish we were catching shallow. Right, so we've had about 10 minutes on that heavy rig over the long line. As I say, we're rotating not only the short and the long line, but equally the rigs as well. So I'm now going to go onto the lighter rig and just see. As you can see, the water seems to have calmed down a bit, so hopefully I can get away with this one. Again, quite often the fish, especially the bream, can be susceptible to a lighter rig here rather than a more or heavier rig, more positive rig. Again, it sort of works against the grain really. Quite often on venues you need to be fishing really positive rigs to catch bream, and especially, you know, decent skimmers as well. Whereas on this particular venue here, what's often apparent, especially in winter and this time of year, is that a change to a lighter rig can be better. So again, keep reiterating what I was saying about having two different rigs set up for each line, sort of a lighter one and a heavier one. As I say, because we're only using small hook baits as well, just using a lighter rig, lighter droppers, a bit more finesse, you can present that bait a bit nicer rather than bombing it straight down to the fish, and as I say, often that can produce a few more bites. So we'll give this about 10 minutes on. Well, there's a lift and a bream on straight away. Got to be careful because we're only on a little hook, but that just goes to show exactly what we're saying about switching the rig, going lighter, and immediately that float's lifted there and we're into one. It's not a big fish, but at least it just goes to show what I was saying. It's probably a little skimmer this. Again, just taking it nice and steady on a light number 4 elastic and a little hook. There, so it might be, oh, this could be a hybrid, this actually, and it is. Straight away there we've changed the rig and sort of the presentation, and we're being rewarded with a fish. So a little tip that you could take away from today's video is that this time of year you need to have 2 rigs set up for pretty much every line you fish on a natural venue. A light one and a heavy one. As you can see, that's brought a fish immediately. Interestingly though, that short line's not been as productive, so it could be that today they just happen to want fish meal. Again, covering all my options today means that I can start getting bites and say being rewarded with the fish really quickly. That's the fastest bite we've had today on a line after we've changed. As you can see, that after we've brought that fish in there, the wind's picked up again, so not sure how long we'll be able to stick with this rig. But again, I've got my options covered. I can always go into that 2 gram rig with a thicker tip float, be able to see it and still catch fish. And what this does is, by going onto this light rig, it tells me that there's fish down there, and equally it gives me more of a chance of catching the smaller fish. So it's a useful little tool to tell you how many small roach are in the peg as well as bream. So say I thought that would have been a small skimmer there when I hooked it, but the hybrids in here do seem to scrap a bit more than the skimmers and bream. That's a really good start. Again, we've left this line for probably 2.5 hours before we've gone on it, and immediately we've had a bite. That was another indication there as well. Really strange that we've not had that same response over the short line. Again, whether it's because we've had a rig in the water or it's just the wrong ground bait for the day, I'm not sure. But it's really interesting this today, and especially on sessions like this, it's when you can learn a lot about a venue. When the fish are in sort of a transition from winter into spring, it often can be much more difficult this time of year than it is in the middle of winter, especially here because the fish do start to come off the bottom in this deep water, and that's why we've had to catch a couple of fish shallow today. Again, by doing that we've had to rest our ground bait lines, give the fish chance to find it and settle down there. Another little movement on the float. Again, lots of small indications now, which is really reassuring. It shows that there's fish down there and there's feeding fish. Again, it wouldn't surprise me if later on we come back on that short line and catch a few bream there, so we're going to still keep that short line going, keep it in mind, and as I say, look to come back on that every so often, see if there's a quiet spell on this line, because really I'm not looking to top up as it turns out today. I think because the fish haven't been feeding really aggressively, there's probably enough bait down there for them on both the long and the short line as well. Right, there we go, another fish on straight away. You can see really difficult shipping back. It's not a big fish, could be a little skimmer, something like that, maybe another hybrid. Yeah, it's a little skimmer this time. There's definitely a few fish now over that ground bait line with the fish meal. As I say, we're not after a massive weight today, but these are good little weight builders to catch, and these sort of preempt the bigger bream coming into the peg. You usually get small skimmers first before the bigger specimens start to push them out. That's a lovely little fish in pristine condition. So what that does is gives me a bit of confidence that I've got plenty of bait down there, 4 good sized balls of ground bait that I fed on that line. And it just seems now that the fish are starting to sort of work their way through it and settle. As soon as the float's going in now, I'm getting indications of fish. Like I say, on the other rig, I wasn't getting any indications at all. That's the difference it makes to have a lighter rig set up. So we'll get the ship back out there, see if we can get into a few more fish. There's a little fish. I've just hooked a fish on the short line now, another nice little roach, just on the heavier rig, and we've just, as I say, I've had a few fish on that long line, and it's just gone quiet there after I had that quick spurt of a couple of skimmers and a little hybrid as well. So I've just thought I'll have a quick go on the short line, give that chance give that long line a little bit of a chance to rest, because quite often when you do go through a quiet spell like that, it's the odd bream moving in. As I keep reiterating, when I do fish for bream, the last thing I want to do is hook the first one of the shoal, because that'll spook the rest of them. So what I'm doing is I've just left that. If it is a quiet spell, then it gives the fish a bit of a rest anyway, but if the bream have moved in on that line, it means that they can gain a bit of confidence, and like I say, hopefully we'll be able to catch them quite quickly as we move a bit later into the session. But at least there's 1 or 2 fish still to be caught on this short line. So we'll give it another sort of 10 or 15 minutes on this. Never know, might catch the odd skimmer here as well. Then again, go back out on that long line, just keep rotating the two, trying to pick fish off until one starts to produce consistently. Again, just one of those things that you've got to consider this time of year. You've just got to keep rotating the swims, see which starts to produce, where the fish start shoaling up, and that's when you can start building a weight. But until then, it's just a case of picking the odd one off. So probably about halfway through the session now, so doing all right. We've had a bream, couple of skimmers, little hybrid and a few roach as well. One sort of decent one, about 4 or 5 ounces. So at least we're catching a few fish now. Another fish on the short line. Again, feels like another little roach. But at least we're ticking over, putting a few more fish in the net. Again, that was a little lift on the float. Quite typical of what I've had over that line, to be honest. That's where the fish are pretty much sort of milling around, chasing the little particles that are coming up off the ground bait. could be with the temperatures of the water being down that the ground bait's taking a little bit longer to start breaking up, and with the sort of the fish not really being as active as well. Again, in summer they'll break up that ball of ground bait nice and quick. This time of year might not be the case, so it takes that little bit longer for them to start shoaling up. But that's two nice quick bites on that line, as I say, on that heavier rig of the two for this swim at 5 metres. So I'll see if I can put a couple more fish in the net, and like I said, then we'll go along and hopefully we'll get into the bream then, if everything sort of goes to plan. Right, there's a fish on the short line, and this could be a bream. Funnily enough, I wasn't going to give it much longer on the short line there, but it did go quiet. Just mentioned to the cameraman Bobble there that seems like catching a couple of fish and they're disappearing. But interesting there, just waited a little bit longer. This is definitely a bream. And that's what I was saying earlier, that they could just turn up down there. Even though it's a roach type ground bait, it's a good fish this. Again, having to be really careful because we're only on a little size 20 hook. See him turning the water there, lovely bronze colour to him after winter when the water's been nice and clear. Stunning fish these. Just scoop him up. There we go. There we go, the second bream of the day. Bit bigger this one. I say it looked like the roach line was coming good for the roach, funnily enough, and we were getting quite a few of them, getting plenty of bites, and it just went quiet there. It's always worth just leaving it for that little bit longer, and the float's just buried. And there we go, a lovely bream, another £1.5, £2 in the net. As you can see, gorgeous colours on him. Fantastic fish to be catching this time of year. Right, so looking at the conditions, I think we'll be able to just about get away with the lighter rig of the two on that long line. As I say, it's the one that's produced the most fish, but equally, if it looks like there's a few bream down there and they're wanting a more static bait, then what I will do is move on to that heavier rig. Like I say, especially when conditions pick up, or in terms of the fishing, so the fishing picks up and you get more fish in your peg, start missing a few bites on a float like this. If you step up to a heavier rig with a slightly more buoyant bristle on the float, then you can sort of distinguish the proper bites a bit easier, and obviously bigger fish will dislodge the bait a bit more anyway, so you can get away with it. This rig's more geared towards catching everything that's over that long ground bait line, as I said earlier. So again, like I said, what I'm doing when I'm swinging the rig out like that is making sure that the hook bait's as far away from the olivette as it can be before I start putting the rig into the peg. That just avoids you getting tangles. Obviously that olivette's going to plummet down, and what you want is your hook bait to arc down behind it with the droppers. Whereas if you dump it in a bit too much, then what you're going to do is basically get those two things tangling as they're starting to fall, especially in a depth of water like that. And that was a bite immediately there. There's definitely a few more fish on that long line, it seems. Could well be that it's due to the introduction of fish meal. Obviously I've introduced quite a lot of bait on that line by comparison, so I'm amazed just how many bites I'm getting on it. Again, although I know this venue very well and I've fished it a lot over the winter, it is very hit and miss, especially this time of year, and you're still always learning. I've fished this venue for a few years now, and it's one of those where, sort of being a local venue, I like to think I know it pretty much inside and out, but that's why this time of year I do set up a lot of kit and give myself plenty of options. Because on another day I might have to introduce loads of pellets and corn and really sort of attack the peg this time of year, but today we've had to pretty much have a more negative approach to really try and keep the bites coming. Like I say, we've had a nice mixture of fish as well, a few decent stamp roach, skimmers, and a couple of breams, so the session's progressing nicely. There's a little lift on the float there again. There's definitely a few small fish over that long line. I'd have been much more confident in saying that's where I was going to catch decent bream fairly consistently. But as I say, this time of year the fish could turn up anywhere. It seems that long line has got plenty of smallish fish over it, small skimmers, small roach, things like that. getting plenty of indications there as well. There we go, that's a proper indication. And a bream that's decided to go a bit mad there. I've never seen that when I've caught one. Don't think he's foul hooked. I think he's just gone a bit balmy. That's quite a strange thing to see from a bream. Incredibly, he's not thrown the hook somehow. There's a proper little indication. You've got to bear in mind that's in about 15 or 16 feet of water, that. I might be wrong, he might be foul hooked, but that was really bizarre. Again, funnily enough, it kind of goes to reiterate what I was saying about using barbed hooks. Yeah, he's fairly hooked. You might have been able to see on camera there, he leapt out of the water a bit like a trout. And that's a fantastic bream. There you go, fairly hooked. I think he's just had a bit of a mad moment, that one. It's a cracking fish, that's near a sort of 2.5, 3 pound, that one. There you go. You can see fairly hooked in the mouth, maggot just sticking out there. That's a belting fish. And even though that's only a tiny little size 20 hook, purely because we're using a micro barb there, that's miraculously managed to stay on. That's a belting fish in absolutely mint condition as well. So we'll get him in the bag, like so. As I said earlier though, the interesting, that's panned out exactly how I pretty much called it. After we had those few skims and then it went quiet, by resting it I've gone straight back on there, and the first indication I've had has been a proper bream. So we'll have another chuck on this rig before we do look to move on to that heavier one, because that was a nice positive bite there. Right, so as you can see, it looks like the weather's closing in on us a little bit, and after that last skimmer that we had on the long line, it seems that both lines have pretty much died off. We've not really had anything to strike at on this short line, so I think we'll probably wrap it up and call this the last chuck of the day. As I say, it's been a good little session today, to be fair. We've caught plenty of fish, and considering the conditions, we've done all right in the 5 hours that we've been fishing. So just try and grab hold of this rig, get it popped on the side. Like I say, just have a bit of a recap of what we've done today. So you can see that we've set up plenty of kit today, and by having plenty of gear and also having a couple of different lines, a couple of different ground bait mixes, we've been able to keep fish coming for most of the session. We had a steady first hour, and then we've had a good sort of 2-3 hours towards the back end of the session where the fish have moved in over both lines and the bream have come short. We've had one there, and we've had a few on the long pole as well, so we've had a good little session today. Decent weight of fish, I'd have thought. So what we'll do now, we'll get the net out and have a look at what we've caught. Right, so there you go, that's our final net of fish at the end of 5 hours fishing today. What can only really be described as pretty poor conditions as it turned out. We tried to get here, have a nice day's fishing, relaxing weather, but it's not been too great, and obviously the fishing's reflected that. It's been quite difficult. We've had to use all the rigs and all the different tactics that we've had today, pretty much used every tool in the armoury really. And as you can see, we've caught a few nice bream, some of a good stamp there, 5 or 6, a few skimmers and a few nice roach as well. Probably about 12 or 13 pound of fish, so a decent bag on a decent, well, a pretty poor day really. But as I say, at least we've kept bites coming, and hopefully there's a few things from today's session that you can pick up, things like having the different rigs set up, different ground bait mix and things like that. So as I say, it's been a decent day, nice bag of fish, and we'll conclude it at that. So as always, thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you on that next episode.